It's a tricky one.
Morning, Your Honour.
Morning, Council.
Your Honour.
Yes, Miss Shannon's here in that second row, sitting next to Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back, Miss Shannon. Dr. Dwyer.
Your Honour, the first witness this morning is Miss Samara Fernandez-Brown, and Miss Fernandez-Brown's statement can be found in the brief of evidence.
Yes,
8-25A. And I call Miss Fernandez-Brown.
Would you like Maxine?
Just over here, Miss Fernandez-Brown.
I can just, or she can just sit there.
Take a seat.
Promise.
Thank you. Samara, could you tell the court your full name?
Samara Fernandez-Brown.
And you've prepared a statement to assist the court. It's dated the 22nd of July 2022, and it's true and correct to the best of your knowledge, yes?
To the best of my knowledge.
One thing I wanted to clarify was in paragraph 1 of that statement, you explained that you're a Walpurgis woman. You were born in 1997. Where were you born?
I was born in Adelaide.
So before I ask you anything about why we're here in court, can I ask you a little bit about your background?
Yeah.
You were born in Adelaide. What are you from Yuendamu, or your family's from Yuendamu?
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, sure. My family are Walpurgis. My mum's side of my family are Walpurgis. My father's side is Spanish. But my mum and most of my family have lived in Yuendamu or the Walpurgis communities that are Wallara, Nyidby, Yuendamu and Lajmano for our whole lives. And so my siblings grew up in Adelaide doing our education and schooling, but we'd go back frequently to Yuendamu and visit family and sort of stay in touch with our culture and our country.
And what languages do you speak?
I speak English and Walpurgis.
You're a cousin of Kumanjayi, is that right?
Correct.
Can you tell the coroner about growing up with him and what time you spent with him?
Yeah, sure. So most of us who are like Walpurgis and from Central Australia, there's a really big connection from like Alice Springs and Yuendamu and South Australia. And so it's quite free, like it's quite normal that people frequent both states. And we grew up down there, and for a period, Kumanjayi and my auntie Leanne would come down as well and live in South Australia, sort of not too far from where we lived. And so we'd go and just hang out and spend some time together, just watch TV, just do sort of the normal things kids did.
And what can you tell us about what he was like when he was a kid?
He was just quite quiet as well, like generally his personality was the same, and so he was quite quiet but still nice to be around and could still have a laugh and just enjoy each other's company.
One of the things you tell the court about in your statement is that you remember watching TV with him. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say his name out loud, but you were watching a TV program that was the same name as his.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I am so sorry to do this to Miss Fernandez-Brown, but the live stream is not working. And she is such an important witness, Your Honour. Might we just take a moment to see if we can get that working? I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Do you want me to go off the bench?
I think that might be appropriate, if that's all right, Your Honour.
Another day in paradise.
So sorry.
You, mate.
We can't say the same. Yes. Hey, Kristen, look at that. There's your hair sticking up. No, that's wrong. That's
He's worried about you being on the live screen. He fixes me up every day.
Harvey Norman special. Great, fix his collar for him. On the back, on the other side. No, on the back collar, just up there. Yeah. Just straighten it out a bit.
Okay.
The good thing about those shirts is when it starts to warm up, it's like a wetsuit. It retains all the heat.
Resolved. So we might just start again.
Okay. And the first witness this morning is?
Miss Mara Fernandez Brown.
Thank you. Miss Brown, if you wouldn't mind just coming into the witness box. Take a seat. Just for the purposes of your evidence, do you promise to tell the truth to the court?
I promise.
Thank you.
Samara, could you please tell us your full name?
Samara Fernandez Brown.
And where do you currently live?
I currently live in Yuendumu.
You've provided a statement to assist the coroner. It's dated the 22nd of July 2022. Is that right?
Correct.
And, Your Honour, that appears in your brief of evidence at 825A. Samara, can I ask you a bit about your background? Sure. You're a Walpurgis woman, is that right?
Correct.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up between South Australia and Yuendumu. So my siblings and I did all of our education in South Australia in Adelaide with my grandmother and some aunties down south. But within the school holidays and break periods, we'd often go up to Yuendumu to visit family.
And am I right that you are a cousin of Kumanjayi?
I am.
Can you tell the court about what contact you had with him when he was growing up?
Of course. Growing up, Kumanjayi spent some time down in South Australia as well, in Adelaide with my auntie, Leanne. And so we'd spend some time just at each other's houses, just watching TV, going to the park and just doing regular things that kids did at that age.
What was Kumanjayi like as a little boy?
Similar to what people describe him as an adult, so he was quite quiet in his sort of composure, but was very enjoyable to be around, and, you know, funny, and yeah, just he always had quite a calm presence.
Did you ever see a change in him then, from the time he was little to through being a teenager, for example?
Not really. Like, it was quite similar, but me growing up down south and him growing up between both states, it was harder to stay in contact. And so if there was a change, it wasn't one that I can identify clearly.
One of the things you say in your statement is that you remember when you and Kumanjayi were living down in Adelaide, you used to watch a TV program together, and that was funny because that was his name.
Yes.
And when he was an adult, say 18, 19, did you still have contact with him from time to time?
When I saw him.
What does it mean to you, that relationship between cousins?
Well, in our culture, generally speaking, your cousins, depending on, you know, the aunties and uncles, they're more like your siblings. They're more like a brother or a sister. And so, you know, it means a lot in the sense that, you know, they feel like your siblings, which is quite a close connection.
Were you aware at any time when you were coming into contact with Kumanjayi after he became a teenager that he had any difficulties with drug use?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And what about with solvents like petrol or sniffing?
No.
That was nothing that you saw in him?
No.
Did you ever see, when you were in Yuendumu, Kumanjayi have any interaction with the local police?
No.
When you went back into Yuendumu, how often would you, I withdraw that, how long would you stay usually?
It would depend on the period. Generally, though, it would be from like a week to 2 to 3 weeks, but no longer because we'd have to come back for school.
Did you ever have, did you ever say hello or have any interaction yourself with police?
No.
So were that, when you were in Yuendumu, do you recall them being any big presence in the community?
No, not from my memory. The only police officer that I had contact with growing up was my uncle, Sebastian, when he worked for the police force in Yuendumu. Right. And so that's the only interaction I had. But there wasn't, from my memory of that time, a lot of presence.
In 2019, you were living in Adelaide doing some schooling still or education, is that right?
I was working and going to uni.
And what were you doing in university at that time?
Well, I worked at the University of Adelaide, as a student support officer, and then I studied at the University of South Australia, studying psychology.
And you continued to come back to Yuendumu from time to time?
Yeah.
To see family there?
Yeah.
In November of 2019, you were in Yuendumu for the funeral of your grandfather, is that right?
Correct.
And I'm going to ask you some questions about that now, so I'm so sorry to bring up that sad time again. Do you remember when you arrived in Yuendumu or around that period?
Can't remember specifically, but from memory, it would have been maybe like Wednesday or Thursday, because initially the funeral was scheduled for the Friday, which then later got moved to the Saturday.
So you'd come back into the community at that time specifically for the funeral of you?
Specifically for the funeral.
I don't want to ask you any questions that are culturally insensitive, so will you just tell me if I make a mistake here?
Of course.
Can you just help the court to understand the significance of a funeral like that in Warlpiri culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for all people, you'd imagine that funerals are really important. It is the opportunity to say goodbye to your loved one, and it's the opportunity to honour them as a person. And it's often the time that you get together with everybody who you might not see throughout the period of the year. And so it's really important for us culturally to have that opportunity to say goodbye and to honour them in that space, so people can say what they want about that individual, and then to obviously bury together in the cemetery. But just to be present, it's a really healing process for us as well, to be supported and surrounded by other various family members who are grieving the same loss.
Had you ever been to a funeral prior to the one of your grandfather through the years growing up?
Yes.
Have you ever, and is that including in Yuendumu?
Yeah, many.
And had you ever seen any police ever at a funeral of Warlpiri people?
Not from memory, no.
When you got back into the community, at any time prior to the 9th of November, had you seen Kumanjayi?
I had seen him on the Thursday during the day.
And can you tell us what he was like then? Or?
Just very shy, same thing. We hadn't seen each other for a long period, so it was kind of just a wave. And I'm also cousins with Rakisha, his partner, so I just spent some time speaking to her. But it's not uncommon for, even though they're like your sibling, it's not uncommon for there to be shyness between both genders, because when there's a period when someone goes through culture or like men's business or something, there is a little bit of a difference in the relationship that you can have culturally.
And we're hoping to learn more through this inquest about aspects of Warlpiri culture, including avoidance relationships. Did you have any sort of avoidance relationship with Kumanjayi?
No, I didn't have an avoidance relationship, but again, I was just very conscious and aware of the fact that there is a gender difference and there is a different experience culturally in our lives. So in that instance, allowing him to come forth.
So the funeral, we know, was on the 9th of November, and you went to the funeral, of course.
I did.
Did you see Kumanjayi at the funeral?
I didn't.
When you explain in your statement what happened after the funeral, and you say you were driving back from the cemetery and you could see all the ladies crying on the floor at the yellow house across from the swimming pool.
Yeah.
And can I just read to you what you say in your statement about that, and I'll ask you about it. You say, I thought to myself, what's happening here? They can't be still grieving there for the funeral. You were taken aback. It was very intense emotions. Perhaps I'll just ask you in your own words, what happened after that?
After seeing them?
You saw them and what happened?
Well, we were in the car driving, and then we saw them, and because there was such an intensity of emotions, we pulled over in front of the house to then inquire about what was happening. And then I wasn't clocking everything because there was just a lot happening, but then my mum, I noticed, realised, and then she went into a state of very high emotions. And we sat there, like, for an instance, like just trying to figure out what was happening. And then other cars were coming in because we'd come in, the women and children had come in a convoy. And so we'd pulled over and were getting the story. And then that just kept happening for a little bit there. And then we were trying to, well, my sister-in-law was calling my brother, who was still on his way back. And then I think my sister called her partner to try to tell them what they thought was happening or what we were being told was happening, which was at that point my family had assumed that Kumanjayi had died, and so they were saying that, and I was trying to remain as calm as possible and not jump to conclusions and try to calm people down.
And I'll going to take you to some very specific efforts you made to calm everything down. But you could, when you pulled over in the car, I think your brother's partner, Brooke Shanks, was there too. Mm-hmm. And you could hear some of the ladies yelling, they've killed him, he's passed away, police have shot him. Was that yelling in Walpurgis at that time?
Yeah.
And you say in your statement, you're a very rational, logical person.
Yeah.
That must have just seemed bizarre to you, was it?
Oh, it just seemed impossible. Like, for me, I was like, there's no way that could have happened, not here.
Had you ever seen police in Yuendumu walking around with guns?
Not to my memory. I'd assume because it's a part of their uniform that it would be on their waist, but it's not something that I noticed, and it's not something also that I looked for.
No. And you were here when I was doing my opening, is that right, Samara?
Yeah.
Remember the photos that we put up there of the AR-15 and the beanbag rifle?
Yes.
Had you ever seen any police in Yuendumu carrying those sorts of weapons before?
Not in my lifetime.
And would you have expected them ever to be in the community?
No, absolutely not.
You were saying to everybody who was so distressed at that time, we need proof, we need to find out what's happened, words like that, is that right?
Correct.
And so after that, you and some others went to the Red House, is that right?
Yes.
And that's the Red House where everybody was saying it happened?
Correct.
What happened after that? What happened when you got to the Red House?
So we all walked over. Well, by that point, men had started coming in from the community, from the cemetery into the community. And so we all then gathered and walked over together. At that point, I didn't go inside the house. A lot of the men did, and the women, we sort of stayed outside when they did that. But I looked around and could see sort of those line marks in the ground, which were drag marks. At that point, I had assumed that they were. And then from there, everybody got into vehicles or started to make their way over to the police station.
At that time when you went to the Red House, did you see Derek Williams there?
There was a lot of people there, so he very well could have been there, but from my memory, I can't see him in it.
And at that time, you explained that the house was not taped off, and there was no attempt to preserve that space.
No.
When you saw those marks in the sand, you explained in your statement it looked like someone had been dragged.
Yes.
What were you thinking at that stage?
Look, at that stage, I was still being optimistic and hopeful, and so I thought there's a potential for him to have been injured, him being Kumanjayi, but by that point, the idea of him being critically injured or passing away wasn't a factor that I was considering.
After that time, You made your way to the police station to try and find out what had happened. Is that
Correct.
right? Did you drive there or walk there?
We drove in my auntie's car. Originally, they'd asked me to drive, but it was a manual car, and that's not my preference. And so I was quite panicked. And one of my other, I can't remember from memory if it was my mum or Brooke that drove instead. But I was in a vehicle when we went to the police station.
And on the way, did you see some other people walking towards the station?
Yes,
Can you
yes.
tell the coroner about that?
Yeah, so we saw many community members making their way. Some had already gotten to the police station, others were halfway there or almost there, and some were carrying weapons on their way, but we pulled over, people in my carload pulled over, like my mum and my sister and I and Brooke, and just sort of had a conversation with some of like my uncles and stuff. And I remember being like, no, you know, don't react like this. Like, give me your weapons. And they were very forthcoming. I think, in my personal opinion, I think it was a reaction, but there was no real desire to cause any harm. I think it was just a protection reaction, because as soon as I asked for it and as soon as I said, look, you've got children or you could get yourself in trouble, they were very forthcoming with then giving me anything that they had.
And where did you put those things that they gave you?
There was a couple of cars that were parked, so there was some that I collected and put in my mum's car, and whoever else was there may have put them in a different car.
And you say in your statement it was quite astonishing because they were giving you those weapons without trying to argue with you or plead with you.
Absolutely. And like I said, there is that difference with gender and culture. And so for myself to ask for that, it was almost like pushing my boundaries culturally to ask for those type of things. And so it was quite amazing how forthcoming and, you know, how much they just listened.
You then in your statement explained that you were standing at the front of the police station waiting for a response and trying to figure out what happened.
Yes.
Did you actually speak to anybody outside the police station who was an officer at any time?
No. So they were inside the police station and people had rung there's a kind of like a doorbell that has a speaker as well from inside, or goes to Darwin. And so we'd rang that a number of times to try communicate and to try get some answers. But we got nothing.
So when you were first there and pressing on the buzzer and trying to get some answers, what was your feeling at the time?
The only thing I was really thinking about is answers. I didn't, again, jump to any conclusions or make any assumptions. It was just, I need to get a full picture of what's happening before I can proceed with anything else.
At that stage, you say it's hard to understand exactly how many people were there, but about 100 or more people there. Quite
Correct.
A crowd.
Yeah.
And you say you don't recall anyone having weapons at that point.
Not at that point, no.
And at that point, of course, you're still thinking, hoping that he is still alive.
Absolutely.
You recall speaking with Derek outside the police station.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Look, I can't remember the exact conversation we had, but it was along the lines of just asking if he'd been informed anything and if he was in the know of what was happening. And he told me that he wasn't, that he didn't know what was happening inside.
At this point, Samara, or sometime around this point, you had your mobile phone on you, is that right?
Correct.
And you decided that you would film outside, and you've kindly provided those to us.
Yes.
And I'll play them shortly. What was your rationale for filming?
Oh, it was such a hard decision to make because everybody was so emotional, and I am quite a private person and I've never gone on live on Facebook before, but there was a lot of like people around me, family members were saying, "Oh, we need to go on live, or we need to record this." And I remember having this sort of conversation with myself, like, do I not? Because it just felt like a sort of a bizarre concept to me. But my rationale around doing it was, if we don't, nobody's going to believe this. Nobody's going to believe that we were calm outside of the police station asking for answers. I think the media or anybody listening would have then been like, okay, but what were you doing? Were you loud, or were you being dangerous outside? And there would have been this concept that we outside would have been doing the wrong thing. So I just needed to prove that that wasn't happening.
You've helped us with the times of these. I've got 7 videos from there and some other videos to show you after that. Well, we might just play them one by one with the assistance of Beck. The first one is at, I think, 8:04 p.m. I'll just play each video and then I might ask you a couple of questions about them.
Of course, and just to clarify that that's the time of the first video, but not the moment we got there. We were there for a little period before the recording started to happen.
I see. Do you, I suppose your evidence you've given us is that when you saw the ladies who were so distressed and everybody started saying this terrible thing had happened to Kumanjayi, you then walked straight to the Red House and then you walked straight to the police station.
Got in a car and went to...
Sorry, and then,
yeah.
Then you drove to the police station.
Yes.
Can you recall roughly how long after that you started filming?
Probably wouldn't have been, like, once getting to the police station, probably no more than 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I'll just ask Beck if she'll play the first one. It's for the benefit of anybody following in the brief. It's 4:18A and it goes for 30 seconds, this first one. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Just have to hit that.
Somebody print it.